I'm here with award-winning filmmaker Brian Metcalf, who is currently a writer, director, producer, and actor, but previously worked as a creative director, writer, visual effects artist, and supervisor on games, DVDs, web, EPKs, music videos, film, and documentaries. Brian is arguably the embodiment of the term multi-hyphenate, so I invited him to share his insights and experience. Brian, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me and for such kind words.
Let's talk a little bit about your journey from aspiring filmmaker to multi-hyphenate, right? Because it didn't happen overnight. Was it always the goal to assume multiple roles? Like, was it a practical or strategic move or more of an organic exploration for you?
It started off where when I was a kid, I would be drawing my own comic books, and I would, of course, have to write my own stories for my comic books, so I'd always be writing them. But I would be watching films all the time, and I would be going, wow, I want to make films and these kind of cool projects and this and that kind of stuff. So I think it was always the ambition of at least writing and directing my own films to some degree. Um, I wanted to be a director, but I realized that nobody was going to give me my own sort of projects to direct or whatever, so I had to come up with my own ideas. And then everything that I did starting off from there, I went to an art school. I became an artist, a digital artist, an art director, creative director, a photographer. All these different things that I did was geared at the main goal of going into film and TV. That was always my main focus. That was always my main plan. But I wanted to learn everything about the industry. I wanted to learn about visual effects. I wanted to learn about writing. I wanted to learn about the film camera and layout and design. So everything was a sort of stepping stone to get into this world of film and TV.
You wanted to familiarize yourself with every aspect of filmmaking. Was it to be a better storyteller, or was it like
Yeah.
a career move, or was it out of interest?
It was both. Because I wanted a career in film, I was always told, do what you want to do what you find interesting. If you're going to spend 1,000,000 hours working on something, make sure it's something that you really enjoy doing. And I always enjoyed film and TV. So that's my reasoning for wanting to do all this type of stuff and to learn about this thing. I found it fascinating. I still find it fascinating. I have as a member of the Visual Effects Society, I'm always getting new magazines on visual effects and learning about the new technologies that they have, even though I'm not in visual effects so much in it anymore. Writing, I'm always getting Script magazine and other things like that, and working with different, learning and reading scripts from other people and reading about it. As a member, being in the Producers Guild, I'm always learning how producers are producing. And of course, being in the Directors Guild, getting directors, DGA magazines and so forth like that, learning about how the directors operate and everything. And also the behind the scenes DVDs were really great on learning in the EPKs, learning how directors did their forms and different techniques and everything. So it was all very important to me because I just find this whole industry extremely fascinating.
Right.
So that's a long-winded answer, I guess.
No, I'm looking for the long-winded answer. So, so that is only a good thing. But I think that even in the era of the multi-hyphenate I believe that we live in that era right now. The path you've chosen or created for yourself is quite extraordinary. So I still want to go back in time a little bit, if that's okay with you. Like,
Sure.
how do you think your childhood shaped the storyteller you are today? Like, was there a specific point where you discovered that you're a storyteller and defined what that meant to you? Or did it happen more gradually, and like which factors came into play there?
Well, I always found myself watching films and TV. I was a couch potato, and I loved watching TV and films growing up. While a lot of friends were out during the summer times, out and about doing things, I was always watching TV and films. And so eventually, when I started drawing, I started to emulate shots that I would see
Oh,
and that I found fascinating. And I would start rewatching the same movies over and over again that I really enjoyed. And by doing so, I started learning about, okay, we're cutting from here to here. And I would start to learn a thing or two about the storytelling aspect of things, how you have a first act, a second act, and a third act. And I was starting to sort of predict and annoy my parents, for example, when we would go to the movies. I would start to tell them, I bet you this is the killer, or I would start to say, I bet you it's going to end this way. And of course, there's going to be a grand finale conflict or whatever or whatnot. And my parents, because they weren't into the whole film industry as much, they would be surprised that I would be able to figure out a lot of plots. And I was a young kid doing this at the time, just saying, oh, I bet this is going to happen, and I bet this and stuff. And it's just from watching these things over and over again. And I'd also start to watch certain directors that they had their sort of auteur shots, such as Steven Spielberg. He would have his specific shots that he would do, and we would go see a new Spielberg movie, and I'm really like, yes, this is his shot that he likes to do over and over again, and certain other directors and everything along those lines. So I always found that fascinating.
I think a lot of people enjoy watching movies and TV, but I don't think a lot of kids are capable of dissecting the three-act structure and a certain directing style. So I do think that is something that well, perhaps you were born with or developed at a very young age.
It's just I was watching the same movies over and over again, and I didn't even know they were called first act, second act, third act. I
Right.
just knew that they were, the beginning, the middle, the finale, and there's always the buildup of the second act that leads to the conclusion of the third act. I always knew that there was a first act to lead you into that, and so forth, and the character development. It was one of those things where I just keep watching it over and over again, that I start going, okay, this is what's going to happen here, and this is what's obviously going to happen here. And then I would start noticing a pattern
Yeah.
as to a lot of the movies that had very similar processes. So
Yeah, but I do think that entire books have been written about this, and lots of filmmakers have to read those books first to have that aha moment. Worked in the industry for over a decade, right?
mhm.
So being the multi-hyphenate that you are, how would you say the creative landscape has evolved over the past 10 years? Like, based on your experience, do you think it offers better opportunities to creatives who want to explore multiple roles?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, in this industry, there were the strikes that happened, and the reason why is because people were not able to make a living doing one particular thing. As a writer, it's very difficult to make a living just as a writer in this industry, and as an actor, 90% of people in the Screen Actors Guild don't make a decent living being able to do this kind of stuff. So you have to do multiple jobs and wear multiple hats. Some people are waiters while they're acting. Other people who are writers are also doing other things. I mean, I talk to people all the time who have other jobs. I have friends who work at Starbucks and are also writers and everything like that. So in this day and age, I would personally rather be doing another thing in this industry than doing a side job. I still might have to do a side job in the future if something dries up, but I've been very fortunate in the sense to be able to do multiple things because, number one, I love this industry so much and love being able to wear the multiple hats, but it's kind of done out of necessity too, because financially it's a greater way to survive. If I just came in as just a director, I would get paid just during the time that I was directing and during my editing phase, and then I'd be off to whatever. But who knows that I would have another job to go to right away. You might have to wait. If you're on a project as a writer, director, producer, actor, then you can essentially come on board when you're writing the project out, and you can go and pitch it as a producer. You can get it then to the directing phase, and then you can be involved in the post-production during the whole editing and all that type of stuff, all the way until the end, and then promotion. And during that time, making at least somewhat of a salary to survive throughout that process.
It started out of necessity, but it also I think it sort of empowered you. It gives you more control as the storyteller. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Underdeveloped, the new 6-part comedy TV series that you recently released. You took on a number of roles from writer to actor, and it seems like this approach requires you to divide yourself into several people. So I am very curious to know how you manage that and what it looked like in practice. Like, can you share one or two moments from this project that capture the essence of being a multi-hyphenate while working on a project?
Absolutely. It starts off in the writing stage, obviously, the creation stage and the writing stage. So when you're doing that, nobody's involved. You don't have cast involved. You don't have anybody involved at that point. So that was a process that I was alone for. And then during the pre-production stage, then everyone starts getting involved and the actors get involved and you start talking to your DP. I would speak with my DP about the shots that I was looking for, and we would go over example shots of other shows and everything like that. So he understood what was happening on, especially if I'm going to be on camera this time, that would be more important to do, even though we would have playback for the camera to do, we had to move very fast because we had limited time to work and limited budget. And so that was another issue there. But during the phase of production of actually shooting it, I would be acting out my specific scenes that I was in, and then I would just try to look at the playback and see how the footage looked. When I wasn't acting, I would just be behind the camera and just focus as being a director. But there would be times when I would want to be focusing as just an actor doing the scene, but I would have other thoughts in my head going, oh my gosh, we could lose this location, or we could lose this actor here, or we're having issues with this problem or this problem with scheduling. So all of these thoughts would be coming in during the time that I'm trying to focus on being an actor. So that was an extra headache for myself, but I'm happy it all worked out in the end. And some of the things that would come up where we would have certain actors that weren't able to appear when we wanted to, or we had certain outfits that we realized were wrong things. So as the writer, I was able to write in certain scenes to change certain dialogue or change locations or whatever the situation would be, where I could just make changes there on the spot. And that's the advantage of being a multi-hyphenate, is being able to write those scenes in particular. Or if an actor specifically came to me and said, hey, I wanted to change the dialogue on this because this isn't something I would say, or it doesn't feel natural, I would work with them to make a better scene out or whatever, whatnot. And, it's a very collaborative process.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to ask, because it seems like the whole dynamic changes because you're assuming multiple roles, right? Do you
Yes.
think there's less distance between you and the people you work with because you're a multi-hyphenate? Like, do you think it would be different if you were just a director on the project?
It is very much so. I mean, when I was just directing certain projects and I was not acting in them, they might not sort of understand what I'm saying or think I know what I'm talking about to some degree. But if I'm there in the trenches with them as an actor, I can actor speak with them. I actually had to go to acting school and take acting for directing.
Oh,
So I could learn how to speak to actors better, because my first film, I was trying to explain to certain actors what I was looking for. And they would be looking at me confused, going, what are you talking about? And I realized that I needed to learn how to properly speak with actors. And the only way to do that is to learn how to act myself. And so that's what the importance was of taking all these different classes and learning from all these different professionals on proper acting, and to work with them and to talk with them. And in addition to that, as a director and as an editor, because I had to edit this show, I had to look at it differently, including myself. I no longer looked at myself as, oh, this is my scene. As the actor, I had to look at it as an overall and say, okay, this is unnecessary. Cut this, cut this, cut this. I cut myself probably more than any other actor. Literally removed dozens of lines or scenes that I was like, okay, this isn't necessary, just because we had limited time to work in. And so you have to really take an approach and take a step back and not think of yourself as the actor in it. You just take a look and say, these are the characters that you're focused on. I've noticed certain people who are actors first and then they become directors. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them would be so focused on their performances that they felt they had to keep them in, and it might slow the project down.
the best stories, I think, are those that are not about a particular person, but about the
Right.
story itself, right?
That's what it has to be about ultimately, is the story itself and not one particular person or whatever, whatnot. You have to have character development, and it has to have the development of the characters, but you have to look at the story as an overall arc. So
Right, right. Yeah, so no egos. Developed came out during the writer strike and you were able to promote it. How did you make sure you adhere to the rules?
right. So first and foremost, we got the assumption agreement from SAG that allowed us as actors to promote the show. And then as a writer in the WGA, this was shot entirely independently of any companies of the AMPTP. So and also the Writers Guild allowed a rule that we could promote our projects ourselves on our own social media, etc., as long as it wasn't connected to the AMPTP and as long as it wasn't companies asking us, from the AMPTP asking us. I spoke with the WGA enforcement team, people from there, and I spoke in depth on about what I can and can't do to make sure I wasn't breaking any rules, because I am a supporter of the guilds, obviously. And I was there showing up for the picketing and everything along those lines. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we were an independent project, even though we're now currently being released through Tubi and through Amazon, and pretty soon some other networks as well. We just got notification that we're going to be released on Verizon Fios through their network as well.
Great.
Their 143 million subscribers that they have.
Congrats.
Yeah,
That's great
you so
news.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. And also there's some more news that we just got that I'm not allowed to openly state as of yet.
Well,
But
that's a cliffhanger. That is good.
yes, that's very good. But at the end of the day, it also allowed me a platform to go and promote. When I was on KTLA, I was promoting the show. At the same time, I wanted to promote the WGA and talk about the strikes and why it was important. We were at Comic-Con promoting the project, and the first thing I said was, I was telling the moderator, because he had a ton of writing questions, I said, listen, I'm not here as a writer. I'm here as an actor, as a producer, as a director, but I'm not here as a writer. So you're going to have to cut out all these writing questions. And as such, it cut 15 minutes out of it. And instead, what I did talk about personally was the importance of the writer's strike to the people who didn't understand what it meant exactly and why it was important to us as writers.
This is a perfect example of how being a multi-hyphenate can empower you, especially in this day and age where, like you said, it's difficult to just be one thing, especially if you want to be a writer. That is hard, which is exactly why the strikes happened. But you could go there as a director, as a producer. If you had just been the writer, your hands would have been tied, right? So
that's correct. I already had an agreement in place that I would attend Comic-Con as a director at least, and so forth. So I had to fulfill those obligations, but I refused to attend as a writer. So that part of me was shut off.
That is great that you took a stance and you just said, like, okay, cut 15 minutes from the interview. I know you produced, directed, wrote, and acted in a crime thriller drama, Adverse.
Yes.
That is completely different from Underdeveloped. You clearly don't stick with one genre, which makes you a multi-hyphenate in a different sense. And besides that, you are developing projects for film, TV, and multimedia with your own company, Black Jelly Beans. With all these different creative endeavors, how do you pick your next project to work on? Like, is it that you just, you take on projects that happen to cross your path and it's like a matter of right place, right time? Or is it that you make these choices deliberately and the storyteller in you feels this inherent need to share different kinds of stories with the world?
Well, interestingly enough, I started out in horror because it's the easiest genre to get into. You don't need big cast in it and all those different things, and it always seems to sell well. But growing up, I didn't just watch horror. I was watching comedy, I was watching thrillers, I was watching crime dramas, I was watching everything. So I realized at one point that all I was getting was offers for horror films, and I didn't want to be stuck in just the horror genre. So I actually made the intentional move to go into the crime thriller, which isn't too far off from there. But then I wanted to spin off to comedy from there, obviously. And, I've always had a fascination with different things. I have a project that's a young adult fantasy. I have a Western. The script came to me, and it was one of those things where I read it and I was like, wow, this is a really interesting story. So at the end of the day, it's about the story to me. It can be any genre, drama, comedy, romance, whatever the heck it is. And as long as it's got a compelling story, that's what gets me more than saying I'm specifically going to do horror films, or I'm specifically going to do comedies or whatever along those lines. I want to be known for doing, just stories that I can feel something for, that I have an emotion towards. Not stuff that is like, oh, I have to be specific to a genre. So.
That is so interesting that you said that, because I also believe that emotion is at the heart of every story, which is also, I mean, let's not open the AI debate, but which is also why AI could never write a really good story, because it has no feelings. And so it can't understand human emotions and human connections. This is very interesting because, especially in the industry, a lot of people do think in genres, like you said, like you make one horror movie, it's good, and then you only get those offers, right? So you
Right.
kind of broke through that wall and did your own thing. But then I think that one concern about being a multi-hyphenate is spreading yourself too thin, becoming a jack of all trades, master of none. You seem to be very committed to each of your roles. So how do you feel about this concern, and how do you manage to go beyond the surface, whether that's as a writer, a director, a producer, or an actor?
When you're writing that first stage, there's nothing else happening. You're just focusing on the writing. And then when it comes to directing, you're just focusing on the directing, unless you're acting as well, which I did this last time. I worked closely with the DP and made sure the shots were right. And then you can look at your playback footage and so forth from there. But then as the editor, all that stuff is done, so you can focus on the editing. So you're not editing, directing, writing all at the exact same time. You're doing them in phases, basically.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, but I mean, how do you become good at all those things?
It takes time to work on each of those crafts. An example is I've been writing for a very long time. My first scripts were terrible, absolutely horrendous. And it's something that I've had to learn by reading a lot of scripts and by studying it a lot, taking classes. I took some Sundance collab classes. I took classes at college for writing, things along those lines. For acting, it's taking acting classes, learning how to do that, studying the trade, directing, working and watching other great directors and studying them, being on set, learning from them. Every single trade of what you do, you have to practice at. You can't just automatically be good at it right away. All of these things, the directing has been the longest, has taken me the longest in a lot of ways, because I started as a little kid doing that. In terms of not directing films, but watching directors and studying them. It became a thing where I started analyzing directors as a young kid. And it was really strange, because I got a lot of complaints from friends going, can't you just shut up and watch the movie or enjoy it? And I'm like, yeah, but this was weird and this crossed the line. And they're like, what does crossing the line even mean? I worked as a professional editor for a while. At a post-production company. I learned about editing and visual effects and all the stuff in post-production. I didn't just say, oh, I'm just going to edit my own film just because right now, all of a sudden. I had worked on a number of clients' films. We worked for all the major studios at the time, and I had a lot of experience doing all that. So it all comes down to studying each of those trades really well. Not just saying, I'm going to be an actor one day, which a lot of people tend to do, and then don't understand why they're not hitting certain marks.
People need a genuine love of storytelling and a level of inquisitiveness. You have to want to explore. You have combined theory and practice. So you studied it, you analyzed it, and then you actually worked in all those different positions, right? How do you think this career path, the one that you've created, how has that affected you as a storyteller? Do you think you've become a better storyteller by doing all those different things? Like, would you have been a different storyteller if you would have just been a director or an actor or a producer?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I've edited certain projects where the director didn't understand editing, and they didn't understand why this shot didn't work to the next shot and why they're missing footage. And as an editor, you understand, okay, I need to go from this shot to this shot to make it smooth. It's always good to cut on action, for example, if a person's getting up or moving or swinging their arm, from going from a wider to a close-up, things along those lines, so you can speed up the action. A lot of directors didn't understand this at first. And so having that experience and learning how to do that helps you as a director to be a better director. Laying out your shots, an example. And when you're talking about this practical approach onto things, at art school, one thing I learned was we learned why certain things were really successful, and we had to emulate the successful ones and understand why the bad things weren't working. And it's the same with film. You take a film and you say a film that's, really respected and great, like The Godfather, you take that and you break it down and you analyze it and why it's so good and why the shots are so fantastic. Or Star Wars, why so many people fell in love with that in the first place. Break down those shots and understand what's working and what's not working. And you take films that are terrible and that have bad reviews and why they didn't work, and you break down as to why they didn't work. So yeah, it's that same approach as to the stuff. The other thing too is sometimes you're really close to a project, so you need other people to help you explain why it isn't working. I've had scripts where I sent it out to people and they would tell me, Brian, this is terrible. Like, I don't understand this, or I don't understand this. And I understood it because I wrote it and I was so close to it, but I had to have people give me notes and say, and I go, that's really good. So that's why script coverage is important. And that's why it's also important. I would be talking with other directors and going over my films with them and shots, and they would be explaining to me why this wasn't working and everything like that. And I'd be like, and they would explain to me. So it's a constant learning process. It's not something that I don't think any of us tend to master right away. I think we just have to keep learning and improving upon ourselves. And the film industry is changing so rapidly. Filmmaking in general is changing. You take a look at older films, action that started after 30 minutes. Now it's after 10 minutes. You look at 80s movies and how much slower they are compared to now. Yeah. Everything changes, so you have to move up with the times.
Exactly. And like you said, I mean, I'm also a professional writer, and I know that writers, whatever it is that you write, whether it's screenplays, books, or articles or whatnot, they tend to stay on their safe little island, which is good at the start because you have to create, but then you have to sail off of that island and just share your work with the world, like you said, because other people are going to have insights. You won't see the things that others are going to see, especially with film. It's such a collaborative medium. I mean, the screenplay is just the foundation.
The most difficult hurdle is getting your project greenlit. And that's something that continues to happen to me. It happens to really big name people that I've spoken with before. I had a conversation with a very well-known director a little bit ago who has done some of the biggest blockbusters. And he's sitting there telling me about the difficulties of getting his certain projects greenlit. And I'm going, wow, really, you? And he's like, yeah. And that's something that we all face, is trying to get our projects greenlit. And it's gotten easier for me, but it's still a challenge. And I don't think that's a thing that will go away ever for me. You still have to find ways to get your next project greenlit. You have to get it distributed. There are so many films out there too that cannot get distribution. And I get tons of emails and letters and people coming to me asking me, can you help me get my film distributed? And it's tough out there.
We already briefly mentioned being a multi-hyphenate can empower you in a way because you do more things. The project is more yours. Does it help in this respect or
yes,
not?
Absolutely. One of the reasons why I did Underdeveloped was because I really wanted my showrunner credit, and I wanted to venture into television, and I had a company that wanted to option it, and I was not interested in optioning it. I wanted to actually make it because I've had a number of projects optioned before and they go nowhere. But I'd never been a showrunner before, and then now that I have the showrunner credit, I'm able to now go into pitches and say, here's a project that I have, and I'm the writer and director, and I'm a producer. And they're like, great. And so you have 3 positions filled right away. And they're like, fantastic. And so that certainly helps you getting in the door in certain ways. And sometimes they'll say to you, you know what, I'd like you to write this, but I have another person in mind for directing, or I have another person in mind for writing, or, flipped around. And it's like, okay. And there are certain projects that I'm attached to where I'm not doing all of the above titles. I'm just attached as a director, or I'm just attached as a writer. And that's fine too. It's all collaborative process, and you want to make a living out there. It is the movie making business, as they call it. It's not just fun. So yeah, I feel that it's gotten easier for me in a number of ways. When I can pitch a project, and instead of them saying, we've already got a director, they can say, well, I like you as a writer. Would you be interested in being the writer for it? Or I'd like you, if you want, I have a role for you you can act in. I've done projects where I'm just the actor and I'm nothing else. And so you can at least get one of those roles and get paid for one of those things.
What I'm sensing is that there is a real, genuine love of storytelling and no ego. And you're really putting the story first, which obviously every filmmaker should do, but few are doing that.
Well, I'll tell you this. We all have, in this industry, I think we all have a little bit of our egos. We just have to make sure to keep them in check. Someone would point something out to me and be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. Okay. And that makes you take a step back and realize that there are other people that might know something better than you. And if you're willing to learn from them, you can make your project that much better.
Exactly.
That being said, you will get a ton of ideas that get thrown your way from people who won't make the project better. It could be self-serving, whatever the reasons that you have to kind of weed through, but you have to be willing to listen to all of them. You have to be willing to consider all of them, if that makes sense, for the best project.
It does. And I think it goes back to you in that editing room where you were watching your own scenes and then were able to distinguish yourself from yourself as an actor and just see what serves the story. Because it is a thin line between your ego and, what's best for the story. But being a multi-hyphenate helps you distinguish between those two things, which is hard. All the different projects that you've worked on and all the different roles you've assumed, what would you say is the common denominator in your work?
I would say definitely now it's a focus on making characters that are interesting. It all comes back to the storytelling. I'm always learning, so certain things are changing, but there are certain things that I've picked up from certain people that I have in my toolbox of going, okay, I'm now going to use this. I'm now going to think about this. I'm now going to remember what this director explained to me. The common denominators are always about the storytelling aspects of it more than anything else. And the storytelling goes across all the roles, whether you're an actor trying to, understand what the motivation of your scene is, or as the writer, you're trying to understand the motivation of the scene that you're writing, or as the director, you're trying to understand the motivation and how you're setting the camera angles to make the audience feel a certain way. It's all very similar in certain ways, and same with editing. All those processes are very similar in a lot of ways. The only thing that I would say would be slightly different is a producer, because the producer's trying to put the whole project together, but even they are trying to say creatively, okay, we need a director who understands this, and we need an actor who can do this and everything. So all of the roles are extremely important.
So everyone's a storyteller, and stories are all about emotion. We talked about how this multi-hyphenate career that you've built has affected you as a storyteller, but has it affected you as a human being? Do you think it's helped you see the world through a different lens?
It has, in a lot of ways. One simple example is being able to travel so much. I get to go to Portugal. I get to go to Europe for Cannes Film Festival. I've traveled. I went to Korea for a project. I mean, a lot of different places that I've been to that it opened my eyes up the traditions, the customs there. Speaking with filmmakers from other countries and getting their perspectives as to how they see things. Foreign filmmakers film things differently than American ones do a lot of times. They tell story visually differently.
Let's talk about the future a little bit. How do you think the broader storytelling landscape will evolve, and what do you think the future looks like for filmmakers who want to navigate that landscape?
Well, right now, because everyone has a camera phone, which is fantastic, the tools that are available are so much easier than when I was a kid. When I was a young kid, I didn't have a camera at my disposal. It took me a while before my parents decided to buy a camera for me to use. Actually, they bought it as a family camera. I just stole it all the time and just used it, or it was literally in my hands 24/7 trying to create cool shots and stuff. Nowadays, everyone has a 4K camera that they can use on their phones, and they have editing equipment easily available on their phones. I've seen people create entire movies on their phones. You can upload it for people to see on YouTube now, and Vimeo and other places like that. I think it's become, in certain ways, a lot easier. In other ways, more difficult to get people's attention because there is so much content out there. So you have to stand out above the rest. And that's one thing that's really important, is to be able to stand out with all of the content coming out now. But again, this gives you an opportunity to not have an excuse. Get together with a group of friends. If I had 4K cameras when I was a kid growing up, I would be getting all my friends together and filming a new film every week. Now there's no excuse for anyone not to be able to do it.
Would that be like, if you had to give filmmakers, screenwriters one piece of advice, would that be the advice? Just go out and do it, or would it be something else?
Go out and do it is definitely one way of doing it, but study your craft, study your films, study your writing, study the editing, study everything about a film that's working or not working. A great thing to do is to watch films that are not good, as well as watch films that are good, so you understand the difference between the two and almost analyze the reasoning as to why they are and are not good. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has a personal experience that they've gone through, emotional experience and everything. So it's a great way to translate it and get it out there.
Does that mean the most successful stories are those that are somehow based on your own experience or story?
Well, I think even for a fantasy film, for the audience to relate to a fantasy character, they have to be rooted in emotions and things that people understand. You know, for Star Wars, Luke Skywalker wanting to leave home and go out and venture out into the world. That's something everyone has experienced at some point when they're a kid, going, I want to go out and experience life and go to college and do different things. You know, the reluctant hero or the reluctant person put into the position that they're put into, which is the Godfather. Yeah. Michael Corleone, he's reluctantly placed into that position of the role, even though he didn't want to be the Godfather and everything. They're all relatable stories. You don't have to be a gangster or a Jedi or any of these types of things to relate to those characters. You just have to have a relatable experience. If you create a character that's so fantastic and the visual effects are amazing, but the character you can't understand, then you can't get on board with that. And there's a ton of films out there that do that. The effects are amazing. There's amazing artistry and stuff, but the characters aren't relatable, so you're not interested in the story.
Exactly. But to create relatable characters, should there be, let me put it like this, is there a little bit of you? Is there a little bit of Brian in every project that you make?
Absolutely. There has to be a lot of Brian into what I make. And it might not be all in one character. It could be a mix of characters. It's the feelings of insecurity. It's the feelings of excitement. It's whatever you're feeling, given to each different character, and you put yourself into each character and you try to say out those words. As a writer in particular, what I try to do is when I'm done with my script, I try to read out loud my dialogue. I go to each individual character. Now I'm this character. So who is this character and what does this character speak like? Do they have a Southern accent? Are they a bully? Are they someone who's timid? And see if that dialogue fits for that specific character. But I try to put myself into every one of those projects and into every one of the characters a little bit to some degree. If you make a character that's just black and white now, it's boring. There has to be, you know, shades of gray in between for them to make it more complex.
My first writing mentor taught me that there is no such thing as an antagonist who is 100% bad or a protagonist who is 100% a good person, like that, because that's what real life is like either.
And that same principle is used for everything. For example, for an actor, they don't want to believe they're a bad guy. They want to feel misunderstood. They want to have relatable things to their character. But as an actor, they aren't a bad guy. Nobody believes they're the bad guy.
What does the future look like for you? Are there any upcoming projects that you want to highlight or can discuss?
We are in discussions right now on several different projects. We've had discussions and meetings about a second season for Underdeveloped, and spin-offs. So those are discussions that are happening. I have a couple projects that I just signed deals with a company I can't say, where I'm doing a horror and I'm doing a crime thriller As I mentioned, I optioned a young adult fantasy, and I have a Western. That's about all I can say for right now as to where they are until I'm allowed to say more.
The projects are keeping you busy, which is a good thing, I think. And I think it goes to show that it does pay off to be this committed to being a multi-hyphenate. Final question, what element of being a multi-hyphenate is the most rewarding and makes the complexity of being a storyteller worthwhile?
Oh, geez. There are so many things. Being able to stay in this industry as a multi-hyphenate. I do not think I would be able to make a proper living in this industry if I was only a writer or only a director or only an actor. Another thing is being able to control the project from start to finish. If you know how to edit, you know how to write, and you know how to direct, then you're really controlling it. They say you make the film 3 times, which is in the writing phase, the directing phase, and the editing phase. But if you're doing all 3, then you can really control it in a proper way.
So there's a practical element and a storytelling element to your answer.
A business and a creative.
A business and a creative answer. Like you said, it's a business, but we're all hopefully doing it for the right reasons, which is we want to tell good stories or stories that we feel should be told. Are there things that I have not asked you and that you might want to share?
You can find inspiration not just from watching movies, but by reading comic books, for example. They have a great way of narrative storytelling, or reading novels. It's a great way to understand and do writing that's different than scripts. Just keep your mind open to a lot of other things. It allows you the chance to get as creative as possible. Being around art all the time and being around creatives, that's something that really can make you want to be in that sort of space.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story and incredible insights. I think they will be very helpful for others, and good luck on all your next projects. I think we're going to be hearing a lot from you.
Thank you so much for the time and space.